So many of the Salaf, so many of the great Imams of the past, they all said this. Iman is statements and actions. It increases and decreases. He says the reality of Iman is to know what the messenger came with. Have knowledge of that. Believe in that. Acknowledge that with your statements. Submit to that with love and submission. And act upon it inwardly and outwardly. And apply it in the da'wah. Apply it in your da'wah in accordance to your ability.
وقل رب زدني علما.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. So carrying on then with Usool-Us-Sunnah of Al-Imaam Al-Humaydi rahimahullah ta'ala, with the explanation of Shaykh Abdullah Al-Bukhari hafidhahullah ta'ala, we got on to the section regarding Iman. And in particular, this section where it now discusses the issue of Iman increasing and decreasing. And that is where Al-Imaam Al-Humaydi mentioned وَأَنَّ الْإِيمَانَ قَوْلٌ وَعَمَلٌ يَزِيدُ وَيَنْقُصُ, that Iman is statements and actions, it increases and decreases. Al-Shaykh Al-Bukhari, he mentions أمر, يعني هذا أمر مقرر عند أهل السنة والجماعة قاطبة دلت عليه النصوص من الوحيين والحس كذلك دل عليه وقد جاءت نصوص عدة عن سلف الأمة وأئمتها في هذا الباب. This is something which is established among Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. This is something established and known among Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And the texts from the Quran and the Sunnah indicate that Iman increases and decreases. And this is something we recognize ourselves too. It is something that you, in of yourself, you recognize that your Iman is sometimes strong and sometimes you feel it weak. And as well as the Quran and the Sunnah, there are multiple narrations from the Salaf also that talk about Iman increasing and decreasing. One of those examples is what is mentioned from Mu'adh ibn Jabal radiyallahu anhu. جاء عن معاذ بن جبل رضي الله عنه أنه قال لأحد أصحابه, that Mu'adh ibn Jabal said to one of his companions, who was Aswad ibn Hilal, اجلس بنا نؤمن ساعة. He said, Mu'adh ibn Jabal said to Aswad ibn Hilal, sit with us, let us have Iman for a while. Sit with us and let us be upon Iman for a while. And what he meant by that, as Shaykh Al-Bukhari mentions, أن نجلس سوية فنذكر الله جل وعلا فيزداد إيماننا. That let us sit together and remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so our iman will increase. That's what he meant by it. Sit with us, let us have iman for a while, meaning let us sit together and remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Quran, Sunnah, etc., and that will then increase our iman. Al-Shaykh al-Bukhari حفظه الله تعالى says, ومن المعلوم أن مجالس العلم وحلق العلم والتذكير والمذاكرة من أبرز صفات أهل الإيمان والتقى والصلاح. That it is known that gatherings of knowledge and circles of knowledge and remembrance and revision, these are from the most distinguishing characteristics of the people of Iman and piety and righteousness. From the most distinguishing characteristics of the people of Iman and Taqwa and righteousness is that they sit in the gatherings of knowledge, in the circles of knowledge, in the circles of remembrance, of revision. وهذا القول الذي قاله معاذ رضي الله عنه مأثور عن غير واحد من الأئمة وسادات الأمة. And this statement of Mu'adh ibn Jabal, where he said, let us sit together for a while and increase in our iman, basically, that statement is also narrated from other imams and from other imams, يعني leaders and imams and those recognized with knowledge. It is narrated from others besides Mu'adh also. ومن النصوص الواردة عن الأئمة تنصيصا على مسألة الزيادة والنقصان, and from the texts that are mentioned from the great imams that explicitly mention the issue of iman increasing and decreasing, ما جاء في السنة للإمام عبد الله ibn al-Imam Ahmad, in the book known as As-Sunnah of Abdullah, the son of Al-Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. He said, سمعت أبي وسئل عن الإرجاء. Abdullah says, I heard my father, Ahmad ibn Hanbal, one time when he was asked about irja, the murji'ah, those who do not include actions within iman, etc. He said, one time my father, Ahmad ibn Hanbal, was asked about them. فقال, so he said, نقول, we say, الإيمان قول وعمل يزيد وينقص إذا زنى وشرب الخمر نقص إيمانه. Al-Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal said, we say that iman is statements and actions. It increases and decreases. If a person fornicates or drinks alcohol, then his iman decreases. That is what Al-Imam Ahmad mentioned. إذن إتيانه بهذه المعاصي منقص للإيمان. So when a person does these sins, that decreases his iman. وضد ذلك إتيانه بالطاعات يزيد إيمانه. And the opposite is when a person does the righteous actions, that increases his iman. وأيضا ما أخرجه الآجري في الشريعة وأبو أحمد الحاكم في شعار أصحاب الحديث بإسناد صحيح أن الإمام عبد الرزاق الصنعاني قال: سمعت مالكا والأوزاعي وابن جريج والثوري ومعمرا يقولون: الإيمان قول وعمل يزيد وينقص. In this narration it mentions that Abdul Razak as-San'ani, one of the great Imams and scholars of the past, that he said, I heard Malik, Al-Imaam Malik, and Al-Imaam Al-Awza'i, and Al-Imaam Ibn Jurayj, and Al-Thawri, and Ma'mar, all of them great Imams of the past, that they all said, Iman is statements and actions, it increases and decreases. Also, Al-Khallal mentioned in his book called Usool-Us-Sunnah as well, from Yahya ibn Ma'in, the famous Imam Yahya ibn Ma'in. He said, Al-Imanu qawlun wa amalun yazidu wa yanqus. Iman is statements and actions, it increases and decreases. Also, Abdullah, the son of Al-Imam Ahmad, also mentioned in As-Sunnah from Uthman ibn Abi Shaybah, another one of the scholars of the past. Famous scholars, you hear their names in the books all the time. Uthman ibn Abi Shaybah. He said, سألت ابن إدريس وجريرا ووكيعا. He said, I asked Ibn Idris and Jarir and Waki' فقالوا, and they all said, Al-Imanu yazidu wa yanqus. Iman increases and decreases. You can see there. So many of the Salaf, so many of the great Imams of the past, they all said this. Iman is statements and actions. It increases and decreases. A huge list of the Imams of the past all saying that. That is why Shaykh al-Bukhari said, this issue is something established and known between Ahlul Sunnah. Also, Al-Imam Al-Bukhari has a chapter in Sahih Al-Bukhari, in Kitab Al-Iman, in the book of Iman, a chapter that says, Babu Ziyadatil Imani wa Nuqsanih. The chapter regarding Iman increasing and decreasing. وَقَوْلِ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى, and he mentioned the statement of Allah in that chapter heading, وَزِدْنَاهُمْ هُدًى, and we increase them in guidance. This is one of those ayat in the Quran where the mufassirun, the scholars of tafsir, have said the huda being mentioned here, that we increase them in huda, in guidance, is Iman. The intent here is Iman. When you look at the context, that this is talking about how Allah increased them in Iman. And there's a few examples like that. Another one in the Quran, and that one is in Al-Kahf, ayah 13. Also in Al-Muddathir, ayah 31. وَيَزْدَادَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِيمَانًا, and those who have Iman increase in their Iman. Also in Al-Ma'idah at the beginning, اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم. Today I have perfected, completed for you your religion. Al-Imam al-Bukhari said, فَإِذَا تَرَكَ شَيْئًا مِنَ الْكَمَالِ فَهُوَ نَاقِص. Why did he use that ayah as an evidence about Iman increasing? On this day I have completed for you your religion. Your religion meaning your Iman. But completed it, Al-Imam al-Bukhari said, if Allah had left anything out of the religion, then our Iman would not be complete. We would not be able to achieve that completion and perfection and high level of Iman. But Allah completed the religion and gave us everything we need. And so if we obey and implement all of that, that brings about the increase in our Iman. Shaykh al-Bukhari then goes on to mention some more points about what Al-Imaam al-Bukhari mentioned in Sahih al-Bukhari. He says, وَالْمُتَأَمِّلُ المتأمل حقيقة في كتاب الإيمان من الجامع الصحيح للإمام البخاري رحمه الله يرى عيانا تقرير اعتقاد أهل السنة في أبواب الإيمان. That a person who looks carefully into the book of Iman in Sahih al-Bukhari, then you will see clearly how the issue of Iman and the Aqidah of Ahl Sunnah regarding Iman is being established there. How Al-Imam al-Bukhari establishes the belief of Ahl Sunnah regarding Iman in the book of Iman in Sahih al-Bukhari. وأنه أراد بذلك الرد على المرجئة, and that Al-Imam al-Bukhari intended by that chapter in Sahih al-Bukhari a refutation of the Murji'ah. He intended by it a refutation of the Murji'ah. وَنَقْضِ مَقَالَاتِهِمُ الْفَاسِدَةِ, and to rebuke or to refute their false statements. كما أراد في كتاب التوحيد من الصحيح نقض ما عليه المعتزلة ومن قال بقولهم. And this is just like how Al-Imam al-Bukhari in the book of Tawheed in Sahih al-Bukhari, the book of Tawheed in Sahih al-Bukhari, he intended by that a refutation of the Mu'tazila. وهذا الاعتقاد هو الذي حكاه الإمام أبو زرعة وأبو حاتم الرازيان فيما أدركا عليه أئمة أهل السنة والجماعة في الأمصار. So this aqidah of Ahl Sunnah, that Iman is statements and actions, increases and decreases, that is what is reported by Al-Imam Abu Zur'a al-Razi and Al-Imam Abu Hatim al-Razi, and that is what they reported that they found their scholars to be upon in the various lands. في الحجاز والعراق ومصر والشام واليمن, in all of those areas, the Arabian Peninsula, around the Saudi Arabia area that it is known as now, Iraq, Egypt, Sham, the northern areas, Yemen towards the south, all of those areas, the scholars they came across, they said, كلهم يقول, all of them said, الإيمان قول وعمل يزيد وينقص. It increases and decreases. وهذه المسألة, and this particular issue of Iman being statements and actions increasing and decreasing in particular, قد حاد عنها بعض أهل الأهواء كالمرجئة. Some of the people of deviation, they went astray in this issue. Like the Murji'ah, they said أن الإيمان لا ينقص ولا يزيد. That Iman does not increase and decrease, they said. Iman does not increase and decrease, they said. فحادوا بذلك عن الطريق القويم والصراط المستقيم. And as a consequence, they then split away and deviated away from the straight path, from the Aqidah of Ahl-Sunnah. بل إن الحس يدل على نقض هذه المقولة وفسادها. Shaykh al-Bukhari says, in reality, your own feeling highlights to you that they are wrong. You know yourself, the feeling in yourself about Iman being strong at times and being weak at other times. You feel that in yourself anyway. And so you recognize that what they are saying is definitely in opposition to the statements of the Salaf and to the evidences of the Quran and the Sunnah. So Al-Imaam Al-Humaydi here has established the upright Aqidah of Ahl-Sunnah, that Iman is statements and actions, it increases with obedience and decreases with disobedience. The next point to note here, and again we briefly mentioned this in the introduction at the beginning before we went into all this, is who are the ones from the people of innovation who opposed Ahlul Sunnah in their Aqidah regarding Iman. خالف أهل السنة والجماعة في هذا التقرير وفي هذا الاعتقاد من أن الإيمان قول وعمل واعتقاد جمع من أهل الأهواء فناقضوا الحق وعارضوه. There are multiple individuals or multiple groups from the people of deviation who opposed Ahlul Sunnah in regards to these affairs of Iman being statements and actions, increasing and decreasing. فَمِنْ قَائِلٍ, and so some of them they said بأن الإيمان هو المعرفة مجرد ما في القلب, وهذا قالت به الجهمية وبعض المرجئة. You remember, some of them they said it is just ma'rifah, it is just a recognition in your heart, it is just that belief in your heart. If you have that understanding in your heart, you are upon Iman. And the Jahmiyyah are the ones who said that, and some of the Murji'ah. Some of them had said وَمِنْ قَائِلٍ يَكْفِي فِي الْإِيمَانِ قَوْلُ اللِّسَانِ. Some of them had said the statement of the tongue is enough. That is Iman. وَهَذَا لَا يُعْرَفُ قَبْلَ الْكَرَّامِيَّةِ. And this statement that what is upon the tongue, that is Iman and that is enough, was not known prior to the deviated sect of the Karramiyah. They were the ones who made that statement. وَقَالَتْ فِرْقَةٌ أُخْرَى, and some of them they said, another group of them said, بِأَنَّهُ تَصْدِيقُ الْقَلْبِ وَقَوْلُ اللِّسَانِ, that it is belief in the heart and statement of the tongue. وَالْأَعْمَالُ لَيْسَتْ مِنْهُ, and actions are not from it. And that was the opinion of the Murji'atul Fuqaha, that it is belief and statements, but actions are not from the definition of Iman. Even though they said you do have to do actions, they said you have to do actions, but it's not part of the definition of Iman. So they are wrong. You cannot give that definition and exclude actions. Some people may say, well, in the end, it's the same thing then. They are saying it's belief in the heart, statement of the tongue, no actions, but you do have to do actions. In the end, some people say that's the same as Ahl-Sunnah then. We say it is statements, it is belief, and it is actions that you must do. They are saying you must do the actions too, but they just don't want to put it inside of the definition of Iman. So the end result is the same. But that is not the way to think of this. That is not the way to think of it. They are excluding actions from the definition of Iman. Even if they are saying you have to do them, by excluding them from the definition of Iman, they've gone against the evidences, they've gone against the texts. So there's an error there. والحق أن الخلاف بين مرجئة الفقهاء وبين تقرير أهل السنة خلاف حقيقي ليس خلافا لفظيا. So it's important to remember this one. Al-Shaykh al-Bukhari says أهل السنة and the مرجئة الفقهاء, there is an actual difference between the two of them. It's not just a technicality. Some people say it's just a technicality. Ahlul Sunnah are saying Iman is belief, statements, and actions. You got to do actions. Murji'at al-Fuqaha are saying Iman is belief, statements, that's it. But outside of that, you do still have to do actions. So you've ended up with the same three essentially. It's just that they aren't including the actions in the definition of Iman. But you've ended up with all three because they say you do have to do actions. So some people may say, well, the difference then is just a technicality. They just don't want to put actions in the definition of Iman, but they're saying you still have to do them. And Ahl Sunnah are saying you have to do them, but include them within the definition of Iman. So in the end, it's just a technicality. Shaykh al-Bukhari says, no. It is not just a technicality. It's a real, tangible difference between them. فليتنبه لما يترتب على هذه المقالة الفاسدة من كلام وتقريرات باطلة قد أبانها وأفصح عنها شيخ الإسلام ابن تيمية في كتاب الإيمان. There are tangible differences between the two. When you say actions are from Iman, compared to saying actions have to be done but they are not in the definition of Iman, that's not just a technical difference. There's a real tangible difference there. And Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah highlighted that real tangible difference in his book called the book Al-Iman. He has a book called Al-Iman, Kitabul Iman. In that book he clarified the real difference that exists here, because people make the mistake of saying it's just a technicality then, and it isn't. ولهذا تباين الناس في ادعاء الإيمان وتحقيقهم له مباينات عدة. And that's why people, they have so much differing between themselves over this issue of Iman. And there's the line of poetry, وَكُلٌّ يَدَّعِي وَصَلًا لِلَيْلَى وكل يدعي وصلا لليلى وليلى لا تقر لهم بذاك. That everybody claims to have the affection of Layla, and yet Layla does not affirm that to any of them. Meaning all those people of innovation and those groups of deviation, they all claim that their belief in Iman, their understanding of Iman is the right one. And in reality, the truth is innocent of them all. ومن باب الإفادة أقول, الشيخ البخاري says, as a benefit here, قد أوضح الإمام الهمام ابن القيم رحمه الله أقسام الناس ومقالاتهم في هذه المسألة العظيمة بكلام قيم ونفيس حيث قال. Al-Shaykh al-Bukhari حفظه الله تعالى is now going to quote a section of speech from Al-Imaam Ibn al-Qayyim. This coming up now is from Al-Imaam Ibn Al-Qayyim. So Al-Imaam Ibn Al-Qayyim says, فصل الإيمان والاختلاف فيه. The chapter regarding Iman and the differences that occurred therein. Iman and the differences that occurred therein. And this is from the book of Ibn al-Qayyim known as Al-Fawaid, the benefits. A book known as the benefits, Al-Fawaid. In that book, Ibn al-Qayyim has a chapter with the title of Iman and the differences regarding it. The differences that occurred with the people in regards to it. He says, وَأَمَّا الْإِيمَانُ فَأَكْثَرُ النَّاسِ أَوْ كُلُّهُمْ يَدَّعُونَهُ. As for Iman, then the majority of people or all of the people, they claim it. And then he quotes the ayah, وَمَا أَكْثَرُ النَّاسِ وَلَوْ حَرَصْتَ بِمُؤْمِنِينَ. And most of the people, even if you strive, are not believers. وَأَكْثَرُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ إِنَّمَا عِنْدَهُمْ إِيمَانٌ مُجْمَلٌ. The majority of the believers, they only have a very general form of Iman. وَأَمَّا الْإِيمَانُ الْمُفَصَّلُ بِمَا جَاءَ بِهِ الرَّسُولُ. As for the detailed Iman regarding what the Prophet came with, what the Messenger came with, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, معرفة وعلما وإقرارا ومحبة, in terms of knowing what the Messenger came with in detail, having knowledge of that, acknowledging that, loving that, and having a knowledge of what opposes that, ومعرفة بضده وكراهيته وبغضه, فهذا إيمان خواص الأمة وخاصة الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم وهو إيمان الصديق وحزبه. So most of the believers have a general Iman. As for the specific and detailed Iman of knowing what the Messenger came with, details of what he came with, understanding that, recognizing that, loving that, knowing the opposites of that, those kinds of details, only the very specific people know that. Only the very specific people know those kinds of details. And they are the likes of As-Siddiq, Abu Bakr As-Siddiq, and those upon his way, upon that type. وكثير من الناس حظهم من الإيمان الإقرار بوجود الصانع. Ibn al-Qayyim says most people, their share of Iman is simply acknowledging the existence of the Creator. They acknowledge the existence of the Creator. وَأَنَّهُ وَحْدَهُ هُوَ الَّذِي خَلَقَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَمَا بَيْنَهُمَا. And that He alone created the heavens and the earth and everything in between them. وهذا لم يكن ينكره عباد الأصنام من قريش ونحوهم. But that is something that even the grave worshippers or the idol worshippers of Quraysh, even they never used to reject that. Even they accepted the existence of the Creator. وآخرون الإيمان عندهم هو. And others, Iman according to them is, or Iman that they have is, التكلم بالشهادتين. That you simply say the shahadatain. سواء كان معه عمل أو لم يكن, whether you actually do actions or not. وسواء وافق تصديق القلب أو خالفه, and whether your statement is in conformity, in harmony with your belief or not. That is like some of the people of deviation who say Iman is just the statement upon the tongue and nothing else. وآخرون عندهم الإيمان مجرد تصديق. And others, Iman according to them is simply to believe. Basically, Ibn al-Qayyim is going through all of those groups of deviation and what they believe Iman is. So you simply believe in your heart that Allah is the creator of the heavens and the earth, and that Muhammad is his servant and messenger. وَإِن لَمْ يُقِرْ بِلِسَانِهِ وَلَمْ يَعْمَلْ شَيْئًا. Even if you do not attest that upon your tongue or do any actions, according to some, it is just the belief in the heart. بَلْ وَلَوْ سَبَّ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولَهُ صلى الله عليه وسلم وأتى بكل عظيمة وهو يعتقد وحدانية الله ونبوة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم فهو مؤمن أي عندهم. According to them, even if a person cursed Allah and His Messenger, and he did the worst of actions and evil of actions, but he believes in the oneness of Allah and the prophethood of His Messenger, believes that much, then he's a mu'min, even if he curses Allah and the Messenger. And some people آخرون عندهم الإيمان جحد صفات الرب تعالى. Iman, according to them, is that you need to reject the attributes of Allah, from Allah being the Most High above His throne, from Allah speaking His speech, and the books and the revelations being the speech of Allah, and His hearing and His seeing and His will and His ability, His loving, His hating. For some people, Iman is that you reject those attributes of Allah. فالإيمان عندهم إنكار حقائق ذلك كله وجحده. So according to some of them, Iman is to basically reject the attributes of Allah. والوقوف مع ما تقتضيه آراء المتهوكين وأفكار المخرصين الذين يرد بعضهم على بعض وينقض بعضهم قول بعض الذين هم كما قال عمر بن الخطاب والإمام أحمد مختلفون في الكتاب مخالفون للكتاب متفقون على مفارقة الكتاب. هذه كلمة عظيمة يصح تنزيلها على كل الفرق والأهواء. So there are those individuals, they followed the opinions of men, the philosophers and their likes, and those opinions and speech of men, they contradict one another. And they rebuke and nullify and invalidate one another. And it is just like Umar ibn al-Khattab said, and Al-Imaam Ahmad said, that they are differing over the book, differing in regards to the book, but they are agreed and united upon the fact that they separate away from the book. They are united upon straying away from the evidences. They all do that. They are all united upon deviation away from the book. That is what they are united upon. And some others, وَآخَرُونَ عِنْدَهُمُ الْإِيمَانِ عِبَادَةُ اللَّهِ بِحُكْمِ أَذْوَاقِهِمْ وَمَوَاجِيدِهِمْ وما تهواه نفوسهم من غير تقييد بما جاء به الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم. And others, Iman according to them is worshipping Allah in accordance to their own desires, in accordance to their personal tastes. What they desire, what their souls desire, they worship Allah based upon that. What is in line with their desires, they do it. Not what is actually commanded for them as a whole in the Quran and the Sunnah. Only what their desires are in line with. And some of them, وآخرون, Iman according to them is ما وجدوا عليه آباءهم وأسلافهم بحكم الاتفاق كائنا ما كان. They believe whatever they found their forefathers upon. Whatever they found their fathers, their forefathers upon, those who preceded them, they follow that. whatever that was. Whatever that was passed on to them, they just blindly follow that. So Iman, according to them, is built upon two affairs. That it must be what they received from their forefathers, passed on to them from their forefathers. And secondly, then they say whatever they said has to be the truth. Whatever they said has to be the truth, and it has to come from their forefathers. That is Iman for them, whatever that is. Some people, according to them, Ibn al-Qayyim says, Iman is simply makarim al-akhlaq, good manners. It is simply good manners. وحسن المعاملة وطلاقة الوجه, and good interaction and etiquette with people and smiling face when you see people. وإحسان الظن بكل أحد, and having good thoughts of everyone. وتخلية الناس وغفلاتهم, and leaving people alone and their shortcomings. وآخرون عندهم الإيمان, and some people, according to them, Iman is التجرد من الدنيا وعلائقها وتفريغ القلب منها والزهد فيها. Some people, Iman, according to them, is to separate yourself from the dunya. Separate yourself from the worldly affairs and to just be upon worship and obedience and have nothing to do with the dunya and the worldly affairs. And that is the exaggeration of the Sufis. Some of the Sufis completely abandon the worldly affairs, zuhd as they think it is, and focus only on worship of Allah, and they exaggerate and go to extremes in that affair. So they believe Iman is to do that. And some people, they believe Iman is mujarradul ilm, just to have knowledge, وَإِن لَمْ يُقَارِنْهُ عَمَلٍ, even if no action is connected to that. وَكُلُّ هَؤُلَاءِ لَمْ يَعْرِفُوا حَقِيقَةَ الْإِيمَانِ, and all of these, Ibn al-Qayyim says, they do not know the reality of Iman. وَلَا قَامُوا بِهِ, and they have not established it. وَلَا قَامَ بِهِمْ, and neither has Iman become established within them. وَهُمْ أَنْوَاعٌ, and so there are multiple types in conclusion. Those who made Iman the complete opposite of what Iman is in reality. And those who made Iman in affairs that Iman cannot be considered in. And he goes through the various conclusions about those people, some saying only statements, some saying only belief, and rebukes all of their positions and how all of their positions are wrong and incorrect. He says the reality of Iman is to know what the messenger came with, have knowledge of that, believe in that, acknowledge that with your statements, submit to that with love and submission, and act upon it inwardly and outwardly, and apply it in the da'wah. Apply it in your da'wah in accordance to your ability. And that is where the reality of Iman is going to be. وَالطَّرِيقُ إِلَيْهِ تَجْرِيدُ مُتَابَعَةِ رَسُولِهِ صلى الله عليه وسلم ظاهرا وباطنا. And how do you get to that Iman then? How do you get to the reality of Iman? It is by following the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam openly and inwardly, outwardly and inwardly. وتغميض عين القلب عن الالتفات إلى سوى الله ورسوله, and to close the eyes of the heart from turning to anything other than Allah and His Messenger. Closing the eyes of the heart from turning to anything other than Allah and His Messenger. وَبِاللَّهِ التَّوْفِيقِ, and he says, with Allah lies success. Then in this final section regarding Iman, Al-Imaam Al-Humaydi said, وَلَا يَنْفَعُ قَوْلٌ إِلَّا بِعَمَلٍ وَلَا عَمَلٌ وَقَوْلٌ إِلَّا بِنِيَّةٍ وَلَا قَوْلٌ وَعَمَلٌ وَنِيَّةٌ إِلَّا بِسُنَّةٍ. Remember in this final part, Al-Imam Al-Humaydi had said that statements do not benefit without actions. And actions and statements do not benefit without intention. And actions and statements and intention do not benefit without sunnah. But perhaps rather than rushing it, we'll do it next time, insha'Allah ta'ala. We'll finish off that section next time properly, going through that topic of how statements do not benefit by themselves without action, and then statements and actions don't benefit without an intention, and then statements and actions and intentions don't benefit without the sunnah. The correlation between all of those affairs, we'll start with that next time insha'Allah ta'ala, and that will be the end of the section of Iman. Then we'll go on to the next chapter or the next section in the Sunnah of Al-Imam Al-Humaydi, which is regarding the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.